Chapter 1. The Daughter Who Held the Family Together. They changed my father's will while he was medicated, then asked me to sign it away with a smile. My own family told me it was for peace, for love, for what he would have wanted. I stayed silent, not because I was weak, but because I was watching. My name is Marin, and before you hear how I walked into that mediation room and watched the truth make everyone go quiet, you need to know this. In my family, the loudest people did not win. The paperwork did. I was never the loud one in my family. I was not the child who challenged decisions or demanded to be heard. I was the one who adapted, who adjusted, who filled in the gaps without being asked. In the Walsh family, that made me reliable, but it also made me easy to overlook. My name is Marin Caldwell. I am 44 years old. I work as a compliance manager for a regional healthcare organization outside of Boston. My job is built around structure and accountability. I review policies, trace decision paths, and look for risk before it turns into damage. At work, I trust systems and documentation more than promises. At home, I trusted people. I grew up in a quiet suburb where neighbors waved but rarely talked, where lawns were trimmed on schedule and problems were handled behind closed doors. My parents believed deeply in respectability, not wealth exactly, but the appearance of stability. My older brother Grant embodied the ideal. He was confident, outgoing, naturally comfortable taking up space. When he went into real estate, my parents proudly told people their son was a businessman. When I went into healthcare compliance, they said their daughter worked in administration. By the time I was in my 30s, the family dynamic was set. Grant was the center. I was the support beam. When my father's health began to decline in late 2019, the shift was slow at first. He forgot small things, misplaced his glasses, repeated stories. He laughed it off. My mother insisted it was normal aging. Grant said he would help if things got serious, but his voice always carried the assumption that someone else would handle the details. That someone else was me. When the pandemic hit in early 2020, everything intensified. Hospitals became tense, overstretched places. Rules changed weekly. Fear hovered over every interaction. My father's condition worsened quickly. He struggled with anxiety, confusion, and eventually required heavy medication. My mother was overwhelmed and exhausted. I stepped in without hesitation. I drove my father to appointments, sometimes waiting in the car for hours because visitor rules changed constantly. I spoke with nurses, pharmacists, and a hospital social worker named Angela, who was kind and careful and always asked whether my father understood what was happening. I managed insurance calls, medication lists, follow-ups, all while working full-time. Grant visited when he could. He brought groceries once. He checked in by phone. He said things like, "Let me know if you need anything," which sounded generous, but left the burden where it already was. His wife, Celeste, came even less often. When she did, she stayed just long enough to appear supportive. During that time, my father leaned on me heavily. He asked me to explain paperwork. He asked my opinion about small decisions. He told me he trusted me because I paid attention. I did not realize then how much weight those words would carry later. As my father's condition declined, Grant began talking more about legal matters. He mentioned power of attorney. He said it was practical, that someone needed to handle things if Dad could not. My mother agreed quickly. She did not want to think about legal complexities. She wanted things handled quietly. Grant took control of the paperwork. I did not object. At the time, it felt like relief. I was tired. I wanted to believe my brother was stepping up. My father passed away in March of 2021. The loss was not dramatic. It was quiet and heavy, like the air had been let out of the house. The funeral was small, respectful. People commented on how strong my mother was. They told Grant he was doing a good job holding things together. They told me I was lucky to have such a capable brother. In the weeks that followed, Grant began organizing what he called necessary steps. He talked about the estate, about probate, about tying up loose ends. Each time he reassured me that I did not need to be involved. He said he wanted to protect Mom from stress. He said he would handle the legal side. Celeste echoed him, always gently. She told me to focus on my own life. She said I had already done so much. I wanted to believe them. I told myself that families fell into roles naturally, and mine was to support, not to question. Still, there were moments that unsettled me, conversations that happened without me, decisions mentioned after the fact, Grant using terms like executor and amendment casually, without explanation. When I asked questions, he smiled and told me everything was standard. My mother avoided my eyes when these topics came up. She said she trusted Grant. She said she didn't want conflict. I interpreted her silence as peacekeeping, not avoidance. In November of 2021, 8 months after my father's death, my mother decided it was time to clear out his home office. She said keeping it untouched made her sad. I offered to help. The room still felt like him. The same desk, the same lamp, the same neatly stacked files. We boxed old paperwork and donated books. While moving a filing cabinet, I pulled open a drawer that had always been stuck. It slid free suddenly. Inside was a thin folder, separate from the main estate documents. The cover had dates written in my father's handwriting. The ink looked worn, as if it had been handled often. I did not read it right away. I noticed only that the dates did not match what Grant had mentioned in passing about when things were finalized. I closed the folder and placed it in a box, telling myself I would look later. It felt intrusive to examine it without context. That night, alone in my apartment, I could not stop thinking about it, about the folder, about the way Grant had insisted everything was handled, about the social worker who once asked me whether my father had support when making decisions. At work, when something doesn't align, we flag it, we investigate. At home, I had been doing the opposite. I had been smoothing over inconsistencies, trusting tone over substance. I told myself I was being paranoid. Grief does strange things. Families behave oddly under stress. Grant was my brother. My mother would never allow something unfair to happen. Still, I felt a quiet unease settle in my chest. Not fear exactly, more like a question I had not yet allowed myself to ask. I placed the folder in a drawer and turned off the light. I told myself I would deal with it later, that families did not betray each other, politely, behind closed doors, with paperwork. At least, that's what I believed then. Chapter 2. When I was asked to sign away my place. The meeting was presented as a favor. Grant called me one afternoon in early 2022 and said he wanted to catch up about a few remaining details from Dad's estate. His tone was casual, almost warm. He suggested meeting at his office since he would already be there and said it would save time for everyone. I agreed before I had fully thought it through, telling myself there was no reason to be suspicious. His office was in a newly renovated building just outside the city, all clean lines and neutral colors, the kind of place designed to feel successful without being intimidating. When I arrived, Grant greeted me with an easy smile and a hug that lasted just long enough to feel rehearsed. Celeste appeared a moment later with 2 cups of coffee and placed one in front of me as if she were hosting a client. We talked about small things at first, work, the market, how strange the last couple of years had been. Grant said he was relieved that things were finally settling down. He said Dad would have wanted stability. I nodded along, trying to match his calm. Then he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a folder. He slid it across the table toward me and said it was nothing major, just a formality. He said it would simplify taxes and make probate smoother. He said signing it would prevent unnecessary complications for Mom. I opened the folder and scanned the first page. The language was dense, formal, designed to discourage questions. I did not need to read every line to know it mattered. I asked what exactly I was signing. Grant leaned back in his chair and smiled. He said it was a release and disclaimer. He said people signed documents like this all the time. He said it was about efficiency, not exclusion. Celeste nodded beside him. She said Mom had been so stressed. She said the last thing we wanted was a drawn-out legal process. She said she hoped I would not make things harder than they needed to be. Something in my chest tightened. I asked what rights I would be releasing. Grant's smile thinned. He said nothing I was counting on. He said it would not change our relationship. He said it was just paperwork catching up with decisions that had already been made. That phrase stayed with me. Decisions that had already been made. I told him I needed time to read it. I said I was not comfortable signing anything without understanding it fully. The room shifted. Grant's posture stiffened slightly. Celeste's expression cooled. The warmth drained out of the space between us. Grant asked why I was being cautious now. He said he had handled everything responsibly. He reminded me that he was the executor. He said this was just a technical step. Celeste spoke softly but firmly. She said she was surprised I was being difficult. She said I had always been practical. She said if I delayed, it could create stress for Mom. She asked if I really wanted to put Mom through that. It was a familiar tactic, framing pressure as concern, framing compliance as kindness. I told them again that I needed time. Grant sighed like I was exhausting him. He said, fine. He said, take a few days. He said he just hoped I would not turn this into something bigger than it was. I left without signing. Within a week, the tone changed. Celeste called me and mentioned casually that they were thinking about selling the house. She said it like it was an idea they were still exploring. She suggested that I might want to clear out my old bedroom soon, just in case. She said it would make things easier if they decided to move forward. I hung up and sat on my couch replaying the conversation in my head. It was not just what she said, it was the assumption underneath it, the way she spoke as if the house already belonged to them to decide. That night, I took out the folder I had found in Dad's office months earlier. I spread the papers across my dining table and read them carefully, the way I read compliance reports at work, slowly, methodically. Dates stood out first, amendments filed in late 2020, signatures recorded during weeks when I knew my father had been heavily medicated, references to decisions made quickly without mention of consultation. I checked public records online, property documents, ownership updates. My name was missing from filings where it had once appeared. The changes were subtle, buried in administrative language, but they were there. I felt a strange mix of disbelief and clarity. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a family disagreement that could be resolved with a conversation. Grant had been in control of the process while our father was vulnerable. He had held power of attorney during that period. He had positioned himself as the point of contact for lawyers and banks and officials, and he had used that position to shape outcomes. The realization did not arrive with anger. It arrived with weight. I thought about the hospital social worker who had once asked me whether my father had support when making decisions. I thought about how quickly Grant had moved to manage legal matters. I thought about how often I had been told not to worry. I was not being dramatic. I was being observant. The next morning, I started making copies. I did not confront Grant again. I did not accuse him or demand explanations. Instead, I began gathering information quietly. I printed documents, I highlighted dates, I made lists. At work, I reviewed policies and tracked compliance risks like I always had. At home, I applied the same discipline to my own life for the first time. By the end of that week, I understood something I had not wanted to accept before. This was not about keeping the peace. This was about erasing me politely. And now that I saw it, I could not unsee it. Chapter 3. Silence by Design. Silence did not mean I was doing nothing. It meant I was choosing where to spend my energy. After the meeting at Grant's office, I stopped asking questions that would only be answered with reassurance. I stopped reacting to comments designed to provoke guilt. I answered texts politely and briefly. I showed up to family dinners on time. I complimented Celeste's cooking. I asked my mother how she was sleeping. I let everyone believe I had accepted the new arrangement. Grant relaxed almost immediately. He started speaking around me instead of to me, assuming I was no longer paying attention. Celeste stopped softening her tone. She talked about plans as if they were already finalized, about selling the house, about dividing things efficiently. She said words like practical and reasonable as if they were shields. I listened, I remembered, I said very little. The first real step I took was reaching out to Dana Brooks. Dana and I had crossed paths years earlier through work. She was a paralegal with a reputation for precision. Not flashy, not loud, just thorough. I emailed her late one night and asked if she had time to look at something personal. We met at a small cafe near my office a few days later. Dana arrived early, laptop open, coffee untouched. She did not waste time with small talk. I explained everything: the folder, the meeting, the document Grant wanted me to sign, the timing of the amendments. Dana listened without interrupting, her eyes moving between my face and the copies I slid across the table. When I finished, she leaned back slightly and said, "You were right not to sign." That single sentence loosened something in my chest. "I keep wondering if I am overreacting," I admitted. "They keep acting like I am making trouble." Dana shook her head. "A release like that is not a courtesy. It is a surrender, especially when it comes after decisions were already made without you." She pointed to one of the pages. "Do you know if your brother had power of attorney at this time?" "Yes," I said. "He took over near the end of 2020. Dana nodded. "And he is executor now." "That is what he says." "Then he held control during the period these amendments were created and benefited from them afterward," she said. "That matters." Hearing it framed so plainly made my hands tremble, not from fear, but from recognition. Dana explained the structure slowly. A will could be valid, an amendment could be valid, but the circumstances could still be challenged if there was undue influence or a breach of fiduciary duty, especially when the person in control was also the primary beneficiary. "This is not about revenge," she said. "It is about whether the process was fair." That word stayed with me. Fair. The next call I made was to Marcus Hill. Marcus and I had been friends since our early 30s. He was a financial auditor, analytical to the core. We did not talk often, but when we did, it was honest. I sent him what I had and asked if he could help me understand the numbers. He called me that evening. "There's a pattern," he said without preamble. "Accounts moved in late 2020. Control shifted quickly. It lines up with the medical timeline you mentioned." "Can you prove intent?" I asked. "No, but I can show sequence, and sequence tells a story." Over the next several weeks, my life split cleanly in two. During the day, I worked. I reviewed compliance reports. I sat in meetings about patient privacy and regulatory updates. I drank bad coffee and nodded at the right moments. At night, I became methodical. I printed documents. I highlighted dates. I built a timeline. Late 2019, my father's confusion increased. Early 2020, the hospital restricted visitors and medications intensified. Fall 2020, Grant took full control of decisions. October 2020, the amendment was signed. March 2021, my father died. After that, everything moved quickly. Seeing it laid out like that made it impossible to deny. Family gatherings became performances. At one dinner, Grant talked loudly about his business success. He joked about how exhausting paperwork had been. He glanced at me and said, "Good thing you did not have to deal with all that." I smiled and passed the salad. Celeste watched me carefully, as if waiting for a crack. When none came, she seemed almost disappointed. My mother avoided the subject entirely. When I tried to bring it up gently, she shut down. "I don't want to choose sides," she said. You already did, I thought, but I did not say it. The most unexpected shift came from Owen. Owen was Grant's son, 19 years old, quiet, thoughtful. He had always been polite, hovering at the edge of conversations. One afternoon, he helped my mother bring groceries in while Grant took a call outside. He followed me into the kitchen and said, "Aunt Marin, can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said. He hesitated, rubbing his hands together. Grandpa wasn't really himself at the end, was he? My pulse jumped, but I kept my voice calm. He had good days and bad days. Owen nodded. Dad says Grandpa wanted him to handle everything, but Grandpa told me once that you were the one he trusted with details, that you noticed things. I looked at him carefully. Why are you asking? Owen glanced toward the window. Because things feel weird and nobody will explain them. I felt a swell of something close to relief, not because Owen could help, but because I was not alone in sensing the fracture. I'm trying to understand it too, I said, without hurting anyone. Owen nodded slowly. If you need anything, I can help look for old emails. I know where Dad keeps stuff. I shook my head gently. No, don't put yourself in the middle. Just pay attention. He seemed to accept that. When he walked back into the living room, I watched him sit beside his grandmother, listening more than speaking. I realized then that the family was not a single solid unit. It was a structure held together by habits and assumptions, and habits could break. The last conversation I needed was with my father's attorney. Thomas Avery had handled our family paperwork for years. I called his office twice and was told he was unavailable. The third time, I went in person. He looked tired when he finally agreed to see me. Older than I remembered. His suit hung loose. His eyes avoided mine. "I am not here to accuse you," I said. "I just need clarity." He folded his hands together. "Your brother is the executor." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm here." I asked him about the amendment, about who arranged the appointment, about whether my father had seemed fully aware. Thomas stared at his desk for a long moment. "I was uncomfortable," he said, quietly. The words landed like a door opening. "What do you mean?" I asked. "He controlled access," he said. "He insisted it was urgent. Your father was medicated. I should have postponed. I did not." "Why?" I asked. He exhaled. "Because your mother begged me not to cause trouble. Because your brother threatened to take his business elsewhere. Because I told myself it would be fine." It wasn't anger I felt then. It was confirmation. When I left his office, the air outside felt sharp and clean. My hands shook slightly as I unlocked my car. That night, Dana called. "If you want this addressed properly," she said, "you petition the probate court and request mediation. You make the facts visible." I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by paper, my father's handwriting on one page, my brother's signature on another. "I don't want to destroy anyone," I said. "I know," Dana replied. "You want the truth recorded." I closed my eyes and let the decision settle. Do it. And for the first time in months, the silence around me felt intentional. Chapter 4. The room went quiet. The mediation was scheduled for late April of 2024, almost 3 years after my father died, and nearly as long since I had stopped trusting the story my family told about that time. By then, the facts no longer felt sharp. They felt worn in, like stones I had carried long enough to know their weight without looking. Still, when I pulled into the parking lot of the mediation office that morning, my hands were cold on the steering wheel. The building stood downtown, glass and pale stone, quiet in a way that felt intentional. Dana met me in the lobby with a thin binder tucked under her arm. She wore the same neutral expression she always did when something mattered. "You ready?" she asked. "I am clear," I said. It felt more accurate. We rode the elevator in silence. The numbers climbed. I focused on breathing evenly, the way I had learned to do during difficult meetings at work. Inside the conference room, everything was arranged to feel calm. A long table, a pitcher of water, a box of tissues placed precisely in the center. The mediator introduced himself with a practiced warmth that suggested he had watched families unravel many times before. Grant arrived with his attorney a few minutes later. He looked relaxed, confident, like a man walking into a situation he believed he controlled. Celeste followed, her expression soft and wounded, already prepared for sympathy. Then I saw Owen. I had not known he would be there. He hovered near the doorway, taller than I remembered, his shoulders tense. When he saw me, his eyes flickered with something like relief, then uncertainty. Grant placed a hand on his back and guided him to a chair. Owen sat quietly, hands folded, watching. The mediator began by laying out ground rules. Respect, no interruptions. The goal was resolution. The goal was not blame. Grant's attorney spoke first. His voice was smooth, confident. He described my petition as unnecessary and emotionally driven. He said my father's amendment to his will had been executed properly. He said my father had been of sound mind. He said Grant had acted responsibly as power of attorney and later as executor. Grant nodded along, arms crossed, satisfied. Celeste spoke next, her voice trembling just enough. "I cannot believe it has come to this," she said. "We were trying to protect the family. We were trying to keep things simple." Grant reached for her hand. "I did everything Dad asked me to do," he said. "Everything." The mediator turned to me. "Miss Caldwell?" I did not rush. I did not argue. I placed my hands flat on the table. "I am not here to punish anyone," I said. "I am here because the record does not match what actually happened." Dana slid the binder toward me and nodded. I began with the timeline. "This is the medication log from October 2020, I said, passing a copy across the table. "It shows when my father was given sedatives." Grant's attorney leaned forward. "Medication does not mean incapacity." Dana spoke calmly. "We agree, which is why this is not the only evidence." I turned the page. "This email shows Grant arranging the signing appointment with the attorney's office," I said. "The appointment was scheduled less than 24 hours in advance. It was not initiated by my father." Grant shifted in his seat. "I was helping. He was sick." "I know what helping looks like," I said quietly. "I did it for 2 years." Celeste shook her head. "This is cruel. You are rewriting history." Dana leaned forward slightly. "This is not history. This is documentation." She explained the structure clearly. Grant held power of attorney during the period the amendment was created. He later became executor. He was also a primary beneficiary under the amendment. That combination created fiduciary obligations. The mediator's posture changed. He leaned in, attention sharpening. I noticed Owen watching closely, his eyes moving from document to document. Grant glanced at him once, then looked away. The mediator asked about witness testimony. Dana dialed a number and placed the phone on the table. Linda Perez answered calmly. She had been my father's hospital social worker. "I cannot speak to intent, but I can speak to vulnerability. During that period, your father relied heavily on others to explain documents. He was anxious and often confused." Grant's attorney tried to interrupt, but the mediator held up a hand. Linda continued. "He was not consistently able to understand complex paperwork without support." Silence settled over the room. The hum of the lights felt suddenly loud. Dana turned toward Thomas Avery. "Mr. Avery, can you explain the circumstances of the signing?" Thomas looked exhausted. His shoulders slumped. He glanced at Grant, then away. "The appointment was arranged by Grant, not by your father." Grant's attorney stiffened. Thomas continued, voice low. "Your father was medicated that day. I had concerns. I should have postponed. I did not." Grant's voice sharpened. "Are you saying you did something wrong?" Thomas swallowed. I am saying I was uncomfortable and I proceeded anyway. Dana asked gently, "Because Grant pressured you?" There was a pause. Then Thomas nodded. "Yes." The room went completely still. Even Grant's attorney said nothing for a moment. Celeste stared at Thomas as if she had betrayed her personally. Grant's face had lost all color. I did not react. I let the truth sit there. The mediator cleared his throat. "Given what has been presented, there is a clear basis to adjust the estate plan." The conversation shifted after that. Less posturing, more calculation. The amendment from October 2020 would be set aside. The original will would stand. Grant would remain a beneficiary, but he would no longer have sole control. A neutral co-executor would be appointed. Certain transactions would be reviewed. Owen said nothing, but when Grant tried to catch his eye, Owen looked down at the table. In the hallway, Owen lingered behind his parents. "I did not know," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. "I'm sorry. So am I." And I meant it. In the elevator, Dana looked at me. "You stayed clear," she said. As the doors closed, I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph, not relief, something steadier. The story that had been told about me no longer held, not because I fought harder, but because I stopped holding it together. Chapter 5. What I took back was my name. The changes did not arrive all at once. They moved quietly, the way consequences usually do. In 2025, from the outside, my family still looked intact. Grant still attended community events. He still shook hands and smiled and talked about new listings. Celeste still posted photos that suggested ease and unity. People still greeted them with familiarity, as if nothing fundamental had shifted. Inside the family, everything had changed. For the first time in my life, I stopped being the person who absorbed tension so others could feel comfortable. I stopped smoothing edges. I stopped explaining things away. That was when my name came back to me. My legal name is Marin Caldwell. It is the name on my birth certificate, the one my father used when he wanted my attention. Somewhere along the way, I had let it soften, shrink, become something easier to overlook. When the final paperwork was completed and the neutral co-executor was appointed, I signed every page as Marin. Each signature felt deliberate, like placing my feet back on the ground. Grant did not call me after the mediation, not once. All communication came through attorneys or brief emails written in a tone that suggested distance was now a form of control. Celeste sent one message, carefully worded. "I hope you are satisfied." I read it once, then deleted it. Satisfaction was not the point. I was not trying to win. I was trying to stop disappearing. My mother June struggled the most. She invited me over one Sunday afternoon, as if pie and coffee could bridge a gap that had taken decades to form. The house smelled too clean, like she had scrubbed it to keep something from surfacing. She poured coffee with shaking hands. "You could have talked to us," she said. "You did not have to go that far." I met her eyes. I kept my voice even. I did talk. I asked questions. I asked for time. I asked what I was signing. No one answered me. June looked down at her cup. "I was scared," she whispered. "I did not want to lose anyone." "You were not going to lose me," I said. "You were afraid of losing him." Her shoulders tightened. For a moment, she looked like a woman who had been holding a door shut for years and was finally tired. "I thought you would be okay," she said. "You always are." That was the moment something settled between us. Not anger, not forgiveness, understanding. "That is the problem," I said gently. I showed her a copy of my father's handwritten note, the one he had tucked away separately. It did not prove everything legally, but it proved something emotionally. June read it slowly. Her breath caught. "I did not know," she said. "You did not ask," I replied, and I needed her to hear that without cushioning it. After a long silence, she asked what would happen next. "Now I live without negotiating my worth," I said. That was the day I told her I would be moving the rest of my things out of the house, not as a punishment, as a boundary. The legal resolution had been clear. The amendment was voided. The original will stood. Grant kept a portion, but not control. The house was no longer a place I needed to cling to. Memory did not require ownership. 2 weeks later, I came with boxes. June stood in the doorway, small and uncertain. Grant was not there. Celeste was not there. Their absence said more than any argument ever could. As I carried the last box to my car, someone called my name. Marin. I turned and saw Owen at the end of the driveway. He looked older than 19 that day, like he had crossed a line he could not uncross. "My dad says you humiliated him," he said. I waited. "But I was there," he continued. "I heard everything. I saw it." I nodded. I did not rush to reassure him. He needed space to name his own truth. "He does not talk about it," Owen said. "He acts like it was just business." "That's how he survives," I said. Owen swallowed. "I don't want to survive like that." Something in my chest tightened. Not grief, not forgiveness, something quieter. "You don't have to," I told him. He hesitated, then said, "My grandfather talked about you. He said you noticed things, that you kept him safe." I looked away for a moment. The air felt sharp in my lungs. "I tried," I said. "I just didn't realize I needed to keep myself safe too." Owen nodded slowly. "If you ever want to get coffee," he said, "just to talk." I smiled, small but real. "I would like that. But you don't owe me loyalty. You owe yourself honesty." He seemed relieved by that. As I drove away, I did not feel victorious. I felt clear. That was the revenge, if it deserved that name. Not destruction, not humiliation, just the quiet correction of the record. Control redistributed, silence broken. The people who depended on my compliance learned what happened when it ended. And I learned something that changed everything. You don't have to scream to be taken seriously. You don't have to burn bridges to stop being erased. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop holding everything together and let the truth stand on its own. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been the one expected to stay quiet for the sake of family, I hope you remember this. Proof does not need rage to be powerful. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about clarity, boundaries, and quiet strength, stay with me. You are not alone in this.